On this edition of the CBS Video Library of World War II, we will focus on the role of U.S. air and sea power in the Pacific Campaign. We'll see dramatic footage of the great sea and air battle that took place at Midway. We'll examine the strategy and see the action behind the taking of Tarawa, the Marianas, Iwo Jima. We'll fly in a B-29 Super Fortress on a bombing mission against Japan. Our first chapter in this historic compilation begins with the story of Japanese success. We go back to the year 1941. The month was December. The date, as President Roosevelt said later, was one that would live in infamy.
In 1941, naval strategists measure the strength of a navy by counting its battleships. The battleship strength of the United States Pacific Fleet is destroyed at Pearl Harbor. Almost unnoticed at the time, none of the burning ships is an aircraft carrier. The American aircraft carriers are on the high seas between Pearl Harbor and Midway. 0840 hours, December 7th. Message from Hawaii radio to Guam, Midway, Wake to the Philippines. This is not an exercise. Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor. The Japanese plan of attack calls for simultaneous strikes at Pearl Harbor and the Philippines. Bad weather delays the Philippine strike for 9 hours. The Japanese expect they will have to fight their way into Clark Field, the main Air Force base in the Pacific. The American commanders in the Philippines have been unable to decide on a course of action. The American bombers are on the ground as the Japanese come in. Clark Field lies open, vulnerable. After the Pearl Harbor warning, American air power in the Pacific is destroyed on the ground. Now the Japanese perimeter explodes through the Pacific. Without anything but token resistance from the remnants of Allied air power and sea power, the enemy seizes control of the South China Sea, the Sea of Java, and the seas of the East Indies. The Japanese army plunges into Southeast Asia. One after another, supposedly impregnable Allied fortresses fall to the enemy. The British army surrenders at Singapore. With the fall of Singapore, the Japanese achieve domination of Southeast Asia. Only one battle moves slowly, the battle against the American army in the Philippines. Japanese pressure is relentless. The Japanese take Manila in January of 1942. The enemy takes Bataan and aims at the last refuge of the Americans, Corregidor, an island in the Bay of Manila. Corregidor is invaded. May 6, 1942, the final surrender of the American Army in the Philippines. The defeated Americans began a death march to prison camps. The Japanese Empire has won the war it set out to fight. The Japanese perimeter covers 20 million square miles of the earth. The Japanese military estimated 1 year to conquer the South Pacific. It has taken only 6 months. A small clique points out that Japan has won everything for which she went to war. It is suggested that Japan offered to negotiate peace with the United States. But the Japanese Navy rules the military, and the Japanese Navy has an inflexible doctrine symbolized by the doors of the Admiral Togo Shrine. Togo, who in 1905 defeated the Russians in one classic naval battle, has left this military axiom: destroy the enemy's fleet in one decisive battle. The commanders of the Imperial Navy argue that the United States Navy must be forced into a last decisive battle. Since the Americans have lost their battleships and since Japan may choose the point at which she will attack, this battle cannot be anything but a victory for Japan. This is the Japanese plan. The objectives are Midway and the destruction of the United States fleet. A later objective is Hawaii. The key to the Hawaiian Islands is Midway. The opening phase will be a surprise attack at Midway, where the Japanese expect only light resistance. The American fleet is expected to steam toward Midway after the Japanese strike. The two fleets will engage in a classic sea battle. And since the Japanese have superiority in battleships and aircraft carriers, the American fleet will be destroyed. The naval cadets at Itajima are told, we have won the battle so far, but the enemy is not yet beaten. The opponent is still strong. We must meet them in one decisive struggle. You will be called upon. You must prepare yourself. The essence of a surprise attack is secrecy, and Japanese security has been compromised because the Japanese secret codes have been broken by the Americans. All messages sent to the Imperial Japanese fleet are falling into American hands. The successful decoding of the Japanese messages is the greatest intelligence victory of the war. Midway will be prepared. On the basis of the intercepted messages, the United States Pacific Fleet begins to take up defensive positions near Midway. The Empire of Japan has not lost a naval battle in 300 years. The Japanese fleet will be at Midway, numerically superior in all classes of ships. But their intelligence is faulty. The Japanese believe the main strength of the American fleet is still in Hawaii or in Australian waters. The Japanese believe their attack on Midway will be a complete surprise. Hidden behind a bad weather front, the Japanese fleet moves to Midway.
Midway was prepared as Pearl Harbor was not. Although the Marines were outnumbered, the island was on the alert.
The Air Force sends as many B-17s to Midway as the island can handle. A force of 17 heavy bombers is gathered on the island. Within a few hours after the planes arrive, they are ordered into the air to make long-range searches. Although we know the Japanese are coming, we do not know exactly where they are. Early in the morning of June 4th, 1942, the decisive contact is made. Enemy carriers are reported. Enemy planes are seen inbound toward Midway.